Hey, everybody, welcome back. I am so incredibly excited to have Dr. Kyle Frost with us, who's joining us from Boston this morning. And she is going to be talking with us about all good things NDBI. So, Kyle, you are busy looking at your bio, Assistant Professor of Pediatrics at the University of Massachusetts Chan Medical School, UMass Memorial Medical Center, the Department of Pediatrics, Division of Developmental and Behavioral Peds. Oof.
I know it's a long name, and I'm also kind of affiliated faculty with the Shriver Center for Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities as well.
I did not know that. You can tell
Yeah.
us more about that as well. So you're definitely busy over there. Share with everybody what you do on the day-to-day basis or your different roles at those incredible organizations.
Yes. So all of these organizations are affiliated and kind of part of one kind of broader institution. So I'm affiliated with the medical school side, which is primarily where I do my research within the Shriver Center, and then I do my clinical work on the hospital side at UMass Memorial. So I'm a licensed psychologist. And so in my kind of clinical role right now, I primarily do diagnostic evaluations for autism. Right now, I'm doing specifically a clinic for kids in the foster care system, which is really interesting work. But I'm hoping pretty soon to be able to start up some NDBI parent coaching as well, as far as our clinical services go.
Would that be within the foster care system services or just kind of more general?
Not specifically. So that foster care clinic is grant funded. So there's kind of a specific project around that. And so the parent coaching services will be a little bit more broad in terms of our offering.
Yeah. And what's the diagnostic clinic look like for you guys in terms of kiddos coming over? How many? How often do you see them? All that goodness.
Yeah, so there's a few different people who are doing diagnostic evaluations in our developmental behavioral pediatrics department. So we see kids under 6.
Okay.
Um, and right now, I know there's one pediatrician who sees kids 1 day a week, I think another who sees kids 1 day a week, and then right now I'm in primarily with this foster care clinic, and that's kind of my 1 day a week of clinical time.
Wow.
Um, so we definitely stay busy. We have a very long wait list that we're trying to improve, but
Yeah.
definitely lots of need within the community.
Mhm.
And then on the research side, which is where I spend kind of the bulk of my time, broadly speaking, I do autism intervention research and kind of implementation science focused research, all about trying to study how interventions can be actually delivered out in the community and kind of implemented more widely, which I know is something that you're very passionate about.
Absolutely. Yes, I had a follow-up question. What are you finding? What is the excitement that you can share? And that is such a big kind of bridge that gap from research to practice. But I love the work that you do that really kind of digs deep into those different variables. Like, what is it, and how do we kind of adjust for it and make it more effective in terms of high quality? So, share.
Yes, yes. And we can come back to that. I know you wanted me to talk a little bit about kind of my general journey path to NDBIs, how
Yeah.
I got here. So maybe that's a good place for us to start.
Yes.
And we can kind of double back around just some of
Absolutely.
the research questions.
Yeah, kind of driving that. So undergrad, grad experience, places lived. Fill us in.
Yeah. So I've been all over the place in a lot of ways. So I did my undergrad at Northwestern University out in the Chicago area. Um, And that is where I first got involved in kind of autism related work. So I initially started volunteering at a community-based organization up in Evanston called Have Dreams, which is still there and is very active in the community locally there. And they offer a lot of, services and programming for autistic people and their families. Um, and I was kind of the resident art instructor for a little while for some of their after school programs.
I
So
didn't
I
know
was
that about you.
also, I double majored in undergrad. So I was a psychology major and also an art major.
Wow.
And so had a lot of fun there with, the youth and some of their different
Mhm.
programs. Um, one summer, I did a funded project where I organized a little gallery show of some of their work at a local art gallery, which was super fun. Um, and anyway, I think that was really my inspiration for getting involved in a lot of really family-focused work. And thinking about, how can we improve access to, high quality services and supports in people's communities, kind of where they are. Um,
Yeah.
and at that time, then I started also working in a research lab that was doing some research in autism and Fragile X. So that was kind of a little bit of research experience there as well.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so after I graduated, then I kind of knew I wanted to keep going with research. Didn't really know what I wanted to do as far as graduate school. So I, applied around places and I landed at the Center for Autism in the Developing Brain in New York.
Oh,
So I worked as a post-bac RA there for 3 years when Kathy Lord was the director of that center. And that was where I got kind of my first foray into NDBIs. So I was an RA on an intervention trial that was being done by several sites, and our site was one of the sites. But I got to get training in DTT, Jasper, and EMT,
wow.
enhanced milieu teaching.
Uh-huh.
So as part of that study, we were delivering the kind of blend of Jasper and enhanced milieu teaching, which now has kind of been folded in, I think, to a lot of what they do for Jasper now. So for a couple years, I was delivering those interventions in schools with minimally verbal kids. Got to kind of dip my toes into parent coaching as part of that study. So it was like an incredible learning experience. Truly do not know how I like was that lucky
The
uh,
stars aligned.
to land that job. But I think that is what really inspired me to then, apply for my PhD. I
Mm.
decided on clinical psychology as the path, kind of over that 3-year period of time. And then that is how I started, getting really interested in parent coaching, more, intervention focused work. And so then I was accepted to the PhD program at Michigan State University, where I did my PhD with Brooke Ingersoll,
Wow.
who's the developer of Project Impact.
That's the connection. And the work that you did in New York, the Jasper kind of blending, kind of bundling it all in with EMT, was that research published? Is that something I'm trying to think at the conference? Connie was presenting on some preschool minimally verbal kids with EMT. Is that part of that study that you were on, do you know? Or
I
a
believe, yes, I believe it's been presented on at conferences. I don't know that I've seen the paper for the main study where
okay.
they compared it with DTT. So I'm not positive on that one. I like followed up, every once in a while I check.
I'm gonna
Um,
look into that and see if there's a resource out there. That would be really interesting to
yeah,
see
yeah, I
results.
can double check and see if there's anything. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's been presented at conferences.
I thought, but yeah, I haven't seen it. So I was so excited to hear you mention it because that sounds vaguely familiar. And I'm pretty sure Connie was talking about it at the NDBI conference, but I didn't
Mm.
see references to where we would be able to find it. Mm. Okay, so we're in
Um,
Michigan. We're in Project
yes,
Impact World,
correct.
NDBI, deeper
Yes, so
together.
graduate school. Um, and yeah, I was, working with Brooke was like the dream. I was so excited. And it was funny because right away she had a Project Impact study running. So I had to right away train up on Project Impact.
Yep.
Um, and so I, kind of like skimmed the manual and then was like, well, this sounds kind of like what I was doing already. So like, let me just jump in and try it. Let's just see how it goes. Um,
Did go
and
well.
so I like went ahead and did my thing, and they were like, yeah, okay, you're like pretty much at fidelity, so like we're pretty good to go. Um,
Hey.
there were some very small technical differences, right? There was like a couple things about a prompt hierarchy here, or some small kind of specifics, like really nitty gritty stuff that differed.
A nuance. Uh-huh.
But big picture, really like those fundamentals were the same in practice, and like, doing one versus the other, an observer of those things couldn't necessarily tell which one I would have been doing.
Yeah.
And so that really early on was kind of the driving force for a lot of my work, including the development of the NDBI-Fi,
Mhm.
and thinking about, okay, what are the common elements
Yeah.
of this group of interventions? Um, so, just for context, I started graduate school in 2016,
Okay.
I believe. So that was right after kind of the original NDBI paper was published.
Yep. 2015.
So it was kind of right
Big
around that
one.
time where people are like starting to think about these ideas, talking about all these things together. Um, and then, right away, I kind of had that experience of like, oh, yeah, I could kind of just
Mhm.
pick up this one and do it over here and tweak it ever so slightly. Um,
Lucky. Just
but
felt
they're
right
really
into your
hard.
lap at the right time.
Exactly. Yeah, it was one of those things. Definitely like right place at the right time.
Good. And then the NDBI-Fi, which is available online, people can get it. I'll link it for people who are listening to learn more about it. The measure is available, the fidelity measure, but there's also a paper that you guys have out there that was talking about kind of the elements, or another paper that you have that blanking on the name of it, where it's looking at essential kind of important components, or not ranking them, but really kind of dissecting them, if you will. What works, what kind of is maybe more impactful than another. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I know, like within the
Yeah, so
ESC.
I can talk through kind of a couple pieces of my work that touch on those things.
Yeah.
So I can give a big picture overview first of the development of the NDBI-Fi, just because that
That'd be great.
happened early on. So that was my master's thesis research. And, you know, like I said, I kind of early on had this hunch like, okay, there are all these common elements. They started to define them in that 2015 paper. Um, but, wouldn't it be cool if we could kind of get all these people's perspectives and talk about really nitty-gritty, the actual strategies themselves, and figure out, what are those really core common elements that we think are kind of most essential, most critical, um, for this class of interventions. And so, again, I was very lucky. I don't really know how we managed to pull this off for a master's thesis, but I was able to get essentially qualitative input from most of the big name NDBI developers, um, in kind of developing that core set of common items. So what I did is I kind of went through everyone's manual that was available at the time, went through some of their papers and really pulled out, these item definitions of like all the different things that people kind of wrap into NDBIs. Um, and then I did this sort of quantitative ranking process where lots of NDBI experts and trainers kind of said, yep, these are the most, these are kind of the essential components of, whatever their intervention was, of Jasper, of EMT, of Project Impact.
Yeah.
Here's the ones that are in the manual, they're in the fidelity form. And so then we were able to use this kind of consensus-based approach to say, okay, well, across all of these different interventions, here's the set of items that everyone kind of said, these are the ones that are, important and in the manual. Um, and so those items were then the ones that we built into the NDBI-Fi, and then we did kind of a validation study. So we actually piloted the measure, did it on a whole bunch of videos, scored it, looked at the psychometrics, um, to kind of evaluate how it worked. So the
And
hope
that's
was
what it was,
that,
right? That's the one I'm thinking of that's available.
sorry,
Is that,
yes.
okay, that's the one I think I'm thinking of, validity of it.
Yep, so that's the published paper looking at the validity, and then, like you said, the NDBI-Fi tool and kind of this coding manual is all freely available. And I'll make sure you have the link to that for the notes to share.
One of the things I really value about the tool is the way that you guys describe how to really assess that fidelity. So is it your little symbols? Is it like a time-based measure? Is it frequency quality? It really helps, I think, unpack some of the things that can be hard or difficult to measure with fidelity, because there's different aspects of how we would be measuring those. And the tool really does a great job of kind of laying it all out there for them. Look for this in this capacity because it makes sense and it's easier to track the quality from it. I don't know if you want to
Thank
talk
you.
about that at all. Yeah, I value
Yeah,
that so
yeah.
much.
So, for that, I think part of that is because of the way we developed the measure, we actually looked at a bunch of people's fidelity tools to try to figure out like, okay, how can we kind of develop a way to rate this? And part of it is that a lot of people's fidelity tools were all a little bit different, right? Because it's actually hard to figure out how to kind of measure and rate these things. I was not the first person to try to do that. So I kind of benefited, I think, from a lot of other people's experiences and trying to develop those things as well. And to your point, we're trying to measure some really different things, and we don't expect them to happen at the same rate or kind of in the same way across an interaction. So what we landed on, like you said, was having sort of a few different ways of rating that are kind of across the measure, and then just telling you which items go with which type of rating. So is this the kind of, you know, strategy that we're expecting is kind of happening all the time versus is this the kind of strategy that's just going to happen like here and there once in a while, and it's kind of a discrete thing, and it either like it's happening or it's not. It's pretty easy to tell. And those just have very different, styles of rating, right? But we found,
As needed and frequency. I pulled it
yeah,
up. I'm like, I couldn't remember the three.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
which makes sense. There's certain things that are a one-off you wouldn't expect to see consistently across an interaction or several interactions, or certain things from a frequency perspective you'd want to see, but not expect to see across. That's one of the things that I really appreciated because it seemed to make sense from an evaluative standpoint of that's really difficult to measure across
Mhm.
in like an ESDM, like a joint activity routine, like a series of themes and variations that we might be doing versus a one-off. And I feel like the measure does a really good job of looking at those key strategies that should be consistently happening throughout that session with the kiddo.
Mhm.
Are really important to have in those teaching episodes.
Yeah, yeah. And to your point, I think the way a lot of these other fidelity tools were developed, right? Their purpose is for research studies. So really highly trained people are spending a lot of time rating them, which makes sense for in the context of research and intervention development. But if someone, outside of that then is going to try to pick it up and use it, it's not user friendly, because it wasn't meant to be. So with the NDBI-Fi, we were trying to make something that, to your point, would be kind of easy to like read and understand and pick up, and not require so much extensive training and expertise to
Yeah.
kind of be able to go through and rate and understand.
Yeah, and even the language that you guys used, I feel is very user friendly for perhaps a BCBA who would pick it up, grasp what we're trying to do with it, and be able to coach a technician if they were in a comprehensive tiered type setting in terms of that instruction and feedback for that support staff to be able to implement and adjust and pivot and shift their practice based on the fidelity measure. And I love that it's so user-friendly with the language as well. So I don't know if you intended that to do that, but it works very well in a community-based NDBI type setting.
Yeah, I love to hear that. I appreciate it very much.
I can tell you worked hard on it. Yeah. And so do you use that a lot in your research up in Boston? Our research has pivoted to other kind of projects?
So at the moment, I'm not doing any research specific to using it. I have used it a couple other times. I know some other research teams are using it in their ongoing grants right now. But I do plan to use it in some future work. So yeah, to be
Excited.
to be
To
determined.
be determined. And then we
Yeah.
need the missing link between Michigan to how you got over to Boston.
Yeah, well, so I graduated and as one does, looking for jobs.
Huh?
Um, and kind of well, I guess I skipped also my internship. So from
COVID.
Michigan, then the final year of a clinical psych PhD is an internship year where there's a match, kind of like the medical school residency process.
Yep.
So I did my internship year out at University of Colorado School of Medicine.
Oh, that's right. I saw that.
Yep. So I was out in Colorado for a year, which was lovely.
What?
And then bopped back to the East Coast. So I grew up in the Northeast.
Doing
So
home.
it's nice to kind of be back, in your family and whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, and I missed kind of the East Coast culture a little bit too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I applied for jobs and I got a postdoc position working with Sarah Beth Broderfinger, um, who is here at UMass, and she does primarily implementation science research as it relates to autism and health equity. Um, and then I was able to transition from that postdoc role into a faculty position.
Yeah. Your stars just keep aligning. I love it. Love your journey that you're on. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's gone well so far, so fingers crossed. Um,
And so the
but
research you
yeah,
have now, implementation study research you're working on right now. I know you mentioned you had a grant that was in the works submitted, hopefully.
yeah. So I can talk a little bit about some ongoing projects. So one project I've been working on is a big multi-site grant that I was going on. So Brooke Ingersoll is one of the PIs of that. So it started actually while I was still a graduate student, but it's a big multi-site study. So it's happening at University of Washington, UMass Boston, Rush in Chicago, and Michigan. And then our site at UMass Chan does some of the implementation science work on that study, and it's studying RIT as implemented in the early intervention system.
Exciting.
So I've been doing lots of work on the implementation team, also with Sarah Edmonds at University of South Carolina. She and I have been kind of partnering to really study kind of the implementation side of this trial. So we've done, lots of interviews, we've collected questionnaire data, and we're just getting to the part where like the study is kind of wrapping up and we can finally start analyzing some of the data. Um, so, we're looking at things like how providers make adaptations and modifications in practice, kind of why they're doing those things. We're
Early
looking
intervention providers.
Hmm?
Early intervention
Early
providers.
intervention providers, yep. We're looking at their fidelity to RIT during the study, kind of whether they plan to keep using it in the future, some of those types of things.
I'm excited to see that when it comes out. Maybe a year, we'll see that summarized, analyzed.
There's going to be a lot of papers, it's a lot of data, but we are hoping to start writing things up, in the coming year. So,
Oh, that's so exciting. So
yeah.
RFP, reciprocal imitation training. You
Yep.
want to talk
Yep.
about that? I'm not sure if all of our listeners would be familiar with that in their NDBI journey. You want to give them just a brief overview of what that entails? And
Yeah. So reciprocal imitation teaching is more of a focused NDBI that really focuses on teaching imitation. And so it was also developed by Brooke Ingersoll. It was actually her dissertation research. Um, and it has a lot of similarities to Project Impact in terms of the coaching model, and kind of the structure, but it really focuses on teaching reciprocal imitation skills. So uses a lot of those social engagement strategies, so imitating the child, modeling new actions for them using similar toys, and then using kind of a supported prompting sequence to help kids then practice and improve their imitation skills.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. I'll put a couple links to some of the papers that I know I have. It's just fascinating, I think, to really get into it. It's one of the ones that I wasn't super aware of when I got into NDBIs, a decade or so.
Mhm.
And then it was a Brooke paper. I was looking at it. I'm like, oh, this is really good. Like,
Yeah.
why have I not known about this? I love that you're able to talk about it and that you guys have hopefully a bunch of research papers that will come out to show this incredible focused NDBI of how effective it can be. And
Yeah.
early intervention providers and perhaps ABA providers or other NDBI providers who could get on the bandwagon and start with some of these strategies.
Yeah. So more to come on that one.
Coming soon.
Um, And then, yeah, so I think I also, as you said, I have submitted a grant in the works. So TBD, would love to do the study though, if if the stars align again for me. Um, but I think, it builds on some of my dissertation research, which was really looking at kind of building out a theory of change of project impact and thinking about really linking, okay, what are the intervention components? What do we think each component is doing? And what is kind of the outcome of each component of the intervention? So as you know, NDBIs have a lot going on, right? There's like a lot of things that we're doing.
Totally.
And they all do kind of they all kind of do something a little bit different, right? And the reason we do all the things together is we think all these things are important and they kind of work in concert to
Yeah.
improve social communication. Um, but we haven't necessarily done as much research on some of the components separated because we've always kind of primarily studied the interventions as whole
Like
packages. So a
interconnect.
lot of them were, initially developed using some of that, like single case designs, looking at individual intervention components. Um, but then in a lot of ways, the research hasn't come back around to say, okay, now that we know about these kind of effective intervention packages, what are the specifics of what these different components are doing? And like, are they all equally important? Do we need to do them all? I think are things that we don't necessarily know yet. So my dissertation was kind of mapping out, primarily using qualitative data, kind of what each of these components are doing. So, for example, we think that following the child's lead, whether by doing a same activity or imitating exactly what the child is doing, really increases social engagement and kind of social attention to what the adult is doing.
Yeah.
Um, and that's very different than what we think, some other strategies might be doing in that interaction.
Mhm.
Um, so the study that I'm hoping to do um, now goes back around to really prospectively study the active ingredients of NDBI. So really looking at pulling apart the component effects and seeing, well, what does like the following the child's lead part do? And does that actually have a measurable effect on social communication outcomes if you can isolate it from all these other things that we're doing? And so it uses kind of a fancy study design to be able to get at that. Um, but yeah, that is kind of what I'm hoping will be coming down the pike at some point.
Love that. I know I think about ESDM fidelity, or the world that I hang out in, and I think about these
Mhm.
different 13 fidelity items that are all important. They wouldn't be there if they weren't. But for me, certain ones I would triage or prioritize because they
Mhm.
are interconnected and can be impactful of other ones. So management of child attention, if you don't have child attention, it's going to impact your ABC format, your instructional techniques. If you don't have child motivation, it could impact your dyadic engagement. They're not motivated to go have that social reciprocity. If our jar structure is off, then our teaching will be off. So when I am coaching on fidelity, I kind of prioritize the ones that I think are going to be the most impactful, like intent versus impact, and look at where should I start? Like they're all important, but some in some contexts seem to be more important in terms of if you start with this fidelity item, it's going to have a ripple effect down to the other ones. Versus if you started over here, instructional techniques, you're not going to improve that if you don't have some attention, motivation for that learning, if you don't have a good structure. I'm not going to see the impact that I want to see because there's other ones that are connected that are going to be weighted. So I'd love to hear you talk about that because I see the ESDM in that same capacity of they are interacting with one another, the fidelity items, and how do you tease out apart which one might be more impactful or more important, if that's a way to describe it.
Mhm.
Add that to your research too. Put that one in there.
Yeah, just add it to the list. But to your point, I think, from part of why I'm interested in this is really from an implementation perspective, because while it's wonderful for kids who can get like a full, course of ESDM, a lot of kids don't have access to that. And so in, a community-based clinic where kids aren't necessarily getting this whole comprehensive approach, what can we get them and what can we make really increase widespread access to, that is still going to be impactful.
Yeah. And I wonder from a parent coaching perspective, again, trying to coach and support, guide caregivers, all of those fidelity measures might be overwhelming versus, hey, this is the one that's really going to help you help your child. That's focused on this. It has the most impact versus they want to do it. Speaking as a parent myself, doesn't mean I don't want to do it. Sometimes life gets lifing and things get overwhelming, and it's hard to focus when that's not your discipline, right? Not your professional background. So I love the thought of maybe kind of prioritizing and kind of not siloing, but really kind of narrowing the focus of what might be really helpful for a parent to start with or focus on, as opposed to everything that they might want to do, but just can't for some reason. So access and support.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm a big proponent of parent coaching. I love parent mediated intervention. It can be so powerful. And like you're saying, parents got a parent. Like there's lots of other stuff going on. And
You want
sometimes it's
to.
unrealistic to say like, oh, we're going to teach you these 18 strategies and you're going to get really good at all 18 of them, right? Um, for a lot of people, that is a really big reach.
Yeah,
And it's not what everyone needs either. Um,
get that.
so if you can sometimes give parents a few strategies that's going to be kind of, maximal bang for their buck,
Yeah.
sometimes they do really well with that.
Yeah.
So I think, if we can know a little bit more about kind of breaking these things down and think about, okay, what's going to be like number one priority?
Yeah.
And if this goes well and you want more, great, we'll keep going. But also if there's like totally way too much going on, then, you've still gotten something helpful.
Yeah, I feel like it's scaffolding. You're just kind of slowly adding and layering and adding and layering. And it makes sense that certain fidelity items you kind of have to do before you get to another one if they build on that or they're enhanced by that. Again, triage, prioritize, however you want to view it. I really feel like that's a great way to support not just caregivers, but support staff, RPTs, who also find themselves very overwhelmed with this big pivot from an adult directed kind of style of teaching to more NDBI, child-centered adult kind of scaffolding. It's a big jump for a lot of them. That's a lot of different changes in teaching styles and understanding why they're doing what they're doing. And pick a couple, start small, and then build up and keep layering it. For me, it seems to be the most successful way to support them.
Hmm. Yeah,
No.
I think another way that, I have not used the NDBI-Fi, but I would be curious to do this, and I would love to do a study on this,
Mhm.
um, is thinking about, how can it be used to actually guide how you do coaching? Because what we found in the initial validation study is that some caregivers without training are doing a lot of the strategies, right? So a lot of these are ways of interacting with kids that some people do really naturally, and others less so.
Yeah.
And so, some families come into parent coaching and like they have some of the strategies down pat. So for those families, you might say, hey, you're doing this, keep doing that. And then I'm just going to teach you this like one little thing over here. Um, Versus, some families might interact with their child in a very different way. And then you might say, okay, let's start with these kind of baseline strategies and see how it goes, see how comfortable it feels. Because I appreciate the structure of, a manualized curriculum. And sometimes, not everyone fits the same profile coming in. So I think to the extent that we can build on strengths caregivers already have, they have a lot, they've developed a whole repertoire of skills in interacting with their child. There might be a way to kind of tailor that systematically.
And that would help with that access as well, access, implementation, and that it's meaningful. That's really targeting the right thing at the right time for that child. And also for the family, I feel like we talk a lot about meet the child where they are, but I also think we need to meet the parents where they are. And again, parents be parenting, life be lifing. It's a lot for some families, and it doesn't mean they don't want to do it. It just means
Mhm.
it's just multiple competing contingencies on their time. And overwhelm and stress and anxiety. It's just a lot, especially if it's a younger, not a younger parent, a parent who's really kind of coming into their autism journey, really kind of understanding where things are at and how things are shifting and just evolving in terms of their parenting, what they need to do, what they want to do, how they do it. And so really kind of meeting them where they're at to not add another layer of overwhelm and really being that kind of guiding light, I think is really incredible. And looking at what do parents need at the right time and what's the most impactful is a way to get some really effective, efficient coaching going, which can help reduce some of that extra stuff that might be helpful, but how helpful might it be
Yeah,
in
exactly.
balancing the things? Yeah. Do you have any advice for NDBI practitioners, students who are listening in terms of how they can stay up to date on things that are happening in NDBI world, good resources that you utilize to learn more about the happenings, any connections or great studies or websites that you can think of? Or how do
Great
you stay up to
question.
date? I know everyone's like, you're so
Yeah, I should have thought of it. So, I mean, I'm really tuned into the research literature. And of course, I have the privilege of my university library and being able to access those things, which I know are not as widely available. Um, so let me think on that and see if I have any links for your notes.
love it.
Put in after, but I feel like, yeah, like my, research conferences
Yeah,
and kind of keeping up with the literature. Um, I have lots of colleagues in the field who I'll like, meet with periodically and, find out through that way. So,
networking
um,
connections. Yeah,
exactly. So I guess, for students and people who are interested, I would say also you like don't be afraid to email people. You might say like, wow, this person is a faculty member. I can't possibly email them. Like people love getting emails about how great their work is. And like worst case, they don't
preface that in the first sentence before you're asked.
anything. No. But like it's really lovely. Every once in a while I'll get like an email from a student and I'm like, oh, that's so like lovely, that they emailed me. And
Hey,
worst case, you don't get an email back. Don't feel bad. You won't get some emails back. That's okay.
yeah.
But people are generally like very nice, very, happy to share resources, very encouraging. So, I would say like don't be afraid to reach out to people either.
Yeah.
Um,
I feel like what I do sometimes on articles, if I'm looking, if I can't find it on ResearchGate or I can't find it somewhere, I'll go to the first author. Usually the email's on there. And if I
mhm.
can't get a response from them, I'll just go down the pecking author. I'll search the second name and try to find an affiliation in an email. And I just kind of work my way through the multiple authors. And usually by then, somebody will get back to me and I'll get something. So that's been my strategy. It takes some time, but if I really want an article, and I don't want to pay $39.95. Again, I can just go straight to the authors or try to figure out through ResearchGate or some other avenue where we can find it. And I'm trying to think of some of the NDBI articles in the different journals. I think that'd be a really cool resource to have. You might find NDBI articles in these different types of journals in different fields. So don't just look as a behavior analyst in the behavior analytic literature, look outside of that. I don't know if we have anything like for the NDBI SIG that I volunteer. I don't think we have that resource that really kind of helps guide people into
Mm.
looking for articles. There are several different journals that you'll find them in. I'm going to write that down. I think that could be a really good resource to help guide people if they're looking, students, researchers looking for articles to learn more, support their own research, to really broaden the scope of where they're looking. Or, like you said, the conferences, going outside of behavior analytic conferences and really thinking about, you might find them at ASHA, you might find them at INSAR, and kind of getting a little bit of a tracking sheet. I think that would be really good. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, that's great. And because I totally agree, part of NDBIs is that they're very interdisciplinary. And so to your point, there's stuff in speech language journals, early intervention journals, autism journals,
Yep.
um, behavior analytics. So there's actually a lot of different types of kind of avenues for that work.
Yeah. Would it be okay if anyone wants to send you an email and tell you how amazing your work is, if we
Of
link your
course.
email address so
Yeah,
people can reach
yeah.
out for questions? Love it.
Yes, of course.
I'll link the NDBI-Fi, the links that are available for the article and then for the manual. And if you have any other things that you think would be helpful, like go here, check this out, just send me an email and I'd be happy to link them. Research projects that you're doing that you're looking for recruitment or student opportunities. It's so great to have this opportunity to connect others with you and to get to know you, but also to get to learn from you. So I really appreciate your time today, Kyle. This has been fabulous.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jamie. It was nice to chat with you again.
Thank you.